Hello there, people of the internet. Today, oh boy, this is a big one. We are talking about the Mauser Model 98. I got me a Yugo 2447 out here, and this right here is, well, a Mauser Model 98, but not quite necessarily the one that we're going to talk about. We'll get more into that one here in a second. What I'm doing is I'm going through everything inside of my arsenal, talking about the history and development and all sorts of stuff in regards to what it is that I own. And I'm doing this trying to earn my way up to 100,000 subscribers. So if you want to go ahead and subscribe to the channel, that would definitely help me reach that goal. If not, then hopefully I'll get you tomorrow, because I'm trying to put out one of these videos every single day. So, where do I begin with this? Mauser Model 98, this right here is what absolutely made Mauser rifles take off all over the world by storm. You know, everything is everything that Mauser had produced beforehand. Yeah, Mauser was successful, but my god, this right here is what absolutely launched Mauser into the legendary levels of success. So the Mauser Model 98 is an updated version of the Mauser rifle, and I think that I've covered, assuming that I was actually able to put them up. Sometimes with YouTube reviews and me waiting, things don't necessarily go up whenever I want them to go up. But I covered the 1893, 1895, and 1896 patterns. And for the most part, the 95 and 96 are just updated versions of the 93. I have a 93 out here that we'll compare the 98 to. But for the most part, the 95 and 96 are just updated versions of that, versus the 98, which is basically its own ball game. This right here is in an absolute league of its own. Regarded as one of the strongest rifled actions out there to ever exist, this is something that we are still using to this day in our modern hunting rifles, some 125-ish years later. As of recording this video, this is 2023. So, lots of similarities between the 93 and the 98, but also lots of not so similar things going on. Let me go ahead and pull the bolts out of these. So we still have our two front locking lugs. The extractors are still incredibly similar. There's a lot about these rifles that are very similar, and they clearly have a lot of influence from each other. But our Mauser 98 has this extra locking lug on the back of the bolt. I know the M95 Chilean Mausers, they had a cut inside of the receiver that the bolt handle would actually sit inside of. So maybe that cut in the receiver to kind of add some stability to the bolt. Maybe that there is what drove the inspiration for the 98 pattern bolt. But of course, I don't necessarily know if that's 100% true myself. That is just me kind of spitballing here with my observations of what we have seen the Mauser rifle do before, and what we see the 98 pattern doing. So, of course, the 98 pattern would be adopted by German forces, and I think in 1903 or 1905, sometime around that time period, the 98 would be utilized using the new version of the 8mm Mauser cartridge. Now, the 8mm Mauser cartridge that the Commission 88 rifles were using, the predecessor to the Mauser 98 upon adoption to the German military, those previous 8mm Mauser rounds were actually a 318 diameter round versus the new 8mm Mauser round that was used in the 98 actions, which were a 323 diameter round. So, what the hell was that? What was that sound? Yeah, that was terrifying. Okay, well, we're just going to let that thing hang out over there. I should be fine. I've got myself a Mauser here. Upon its adoption to German militaries, one of the vast, what's the word I'm looking for, ideologies of militaries during that time period is that combat was going to be taking place at farther distances than combat actually took place at. So countries were adopting these huge long rifles, and they had sights like minimum 400 yards, because they just simply did not think that combat was going to be taking place at closer ranges than that, when in reality, not only did combat take place like much closer than expected, it took place so close that the 400 yard zero of your rifle was basically completely worthless. You'd have to like aim under the person to hit them at the 100 yards that combat typically took place at. So of course, as time would progress, you know, right before World War II, after World War I, countries were really starting to see that shorter rifles with a minimum zero of either 100 or 200 yards were definitely going to be the better idea, the better option for the rifles that they were issuing to their mass forces. Especially after World War I, the Mauser 98, I guess I probably should have brought this up earlier in the video, but the Mauser 98 was adopted by a huge number of countries. I know the 93 was adopted by the Spanish and by the Turkish and probably a couple of other smaller countries that had adopted the 93. The 95 was the Chileans, the 96 the Swedes had got, but those were essentially still 93 actions with a couple of minor changes. And then up comes the 98. And my God, the number of countries that adopted the 98, like the countries were either using the Enfield or the Mauser, or there are a couple of French guns that some countries were using, or the Carcano series that the Italians were using. You had Enfield, Mauser, the French stuff, and then the Italian Carcano series. Or you had some sort of variant of Mauser, be it 93 or 98. And like most countries around the world adopted either a 93 pattern or like the 95, 96 variants, which are just variations of the 93. Yeah, the 93 pattern or the 98 pattern that was just mass adopted by countries all around the world, including the United States with their adoption of the 1903, which is pretty much a Mauser action, and the Japanese and their Arisaka, which is pretty much a Mauser action. And okay, yeah, the Mauser 98 was, well, just the Mauser action in general, was absolutely adopted en masse all over the world, especially after the 98 had been adopted. Most countries, if they adopted a Mauser, they were going to adopt the 98, and it's good for ants too, apparently. Most countries would adopt the 98 because it was an incredibly robust, incredibly strong design. Of course, after World War II, the Mauser 98, along with basically every other military service rifle, went from being a nice long rifle to a nice short rifle, and that is kind of where our Mauser carbines come into this day. And then after World War II, it was seen that bolt-action rifles were becoming more antiquated than the what's the word I'm looking for? The governments of the militaries of the countries who had the rifles really wanted. And so as a result, they moved on from bolt-action or manually operated systems to self-loading rifles. And the Mauser 98 has moved on to being more of a hunting slash sporting slash recreational rifle, as opposed to a standard issue military arm. However, even though it has, in a military context, been surpassed by self-loading rifles, the design of the bolt action is still so good and so robust that the bolt actions that we make nowadays, most of them are based off of that Mauser action. So speaking of Mauser action, let's go ahead and put this bad boy to use. I'm just going to go ahead and send some blood in my car down there. This is 155 grain Turkish ammo that I'm going to send through this Yugo, assuming that this actually goes off. This particular batch here has been giving me some problems with some duds and some hang fires, so we might have a couple of duds and hang fires in this particular batch, but even if that does happen, oh well. I got a heavy firing pin spring inside of this Yugo Mauser. I think it's like 26 pounds or 29 pounds or something like that. So if it doesn't go off, it's probably not going to go off. I'm just going to go ahead and aim for like the front of the car, I guess. That one went off, and now I got to clean this Mauser because this ammunition is in fact corrosive. I'm going to aim for the steel target. Aha! You know what? That was fun. I'm going to aim for the steel target again. I like how whenever I hit the steel, all the concrete dust comes up off the car. And let's aim for the front room of the car. Why not? Alright. There we go. Those fired no problem. So yeah, that is our 98 action. It is an incredibly strong, incredibly durable action that was adopted by a tremendous amount of countries during its existence of being used in military forces. So there were, other than the locking lugs, I do want to point out the update, because I'm sure somebody's going to point it out in the comments, point out the update on the bolt where our bolt face is now round, as opposed to the 93 having a square bolt face, and we are now a cock on open system, as opposed to a cock on closed system. Now there are some pros and cons to each of these systems. But I personally prefer the cock on closed system as opposed to the cock on open, because on the cock on open, not only are you trying to extract the round, but you're also fighting spring tension as you cock your rifle as well. So I just don't like that myself, but of course there's going to be plenty of other people out there who wholeheartedly disagree with me, and by all means you guys can disagree all you want. I prefer the 93 action, well, not necessarily 93 action, just actions that have a cock on closed system. This way I don't have to fight spring tension like the Enfield series or the 95, 96, 93 action of Mauser series, or a couple of others out there. Anyway, I've rambled on long enough about this system. I think I covered most of the vague, not direct history of the Mauser 98, and there's a lot that I glossed over. I am trying to cover like a century's worth of development for this rifle in the span of about 10 minutes. So thanks for watching, folks. I appreciate your time. Like, subscribe, share. Description below has a link to all sorts of stuff. Go check it out. You guys go off. Have yourself a fantastic day. I will see you guys on the next video. Been a little while since I've done this. Bonnie and Clyde be damned. Poor man's Garen. It's a shame that bolt-action shotguns aren't more mainstream.